I heard my shoulder hit the first stair. Then my hip, then the back of my head. By the time I reached the bottom, the ceiling above me had turned into a white blur. I couldn't move, but I could still hear. My mother's shoes stopped beside me. "We'll tell everyone she slipped." My father was breathing hard somewhere above her. "Good," he said. "Dead people can't tell the truth." I kept my eyes closed. What they didn't know was that I already knew the truth. 2 weeks earlier, an email had landed in my inbox by mistake. Attached was version 6 of a restructuring agreement for my family's renovation company. I had only ever been shown version 3. Version 6 cut the value of my 20% ownership, shifted more control toward my younger sister Paige, and treated my signature like a formality they expected to collect later. My mother had written one sentence underneath it. "She'll sign. She always does when it becomes about family." That was the part they had miscalculated. I was 25 years old, and I worked in project controls. My job was finding the difference between what people said had been approved and what the record actually showed. So before I ever walked into that Sunday dinner, I had copied the emails, saved the drafts, and started mapping every dollar, password, subscription, and obligation my family had quietly attached to my name. Lying at the bottom of those stairs, I realized I had one advantage left. They thought I was dead, and for the first time in my life, I decided not to correct them. 2 weeks earlier, I had been sitting in a glass conference room on the 23rd floor of a construction office in downtown Chicago, comparing two schedule updates for a hospital expansion. One showed the electrical rough-in finishing on October 14. The other showed October 21. 7 days did not sound dramatic until you understood that 6 other activities depended on that date. That was my job. I looked for the small difference that could become an expensive problem later. My name is Nora Whitmore. At 25, I was a project controls analyst for one of the larger general contractors in the city. I tracked schedule changes, cost variance, change orders, and the 1,000 quiet decisions people forgot they had made once something went wrong. My coworker, Priya Shah, called it professional pessimism. I called it documentation. That afternoon, I was halfway through comparing 2 change logs when a notification appeared on the corner of my screen. The sender was my father. The subject line read, Whitmore. Restructure final. I almost ignored it. Whitmore Renovation was my parents' company, not my day job. I owned 20% of it, but for years my family had treated that ownership less like an investment and more like a permanent invitation to work weekends. I clicked the email. Then I stopped breathing for a second. Attached was a file called Whitmore Redemption Amendment V6 PDF Version 6. I had version 3 saved at home. My father had given it to me 6 weeks earlier and described it as preliminary. "We're just cleaning up the ownership," he had said. "Nothing changes unless everyone agrees." I opened version 6 beside version 3. The first changes were boring enough. Paragraph numbering. Defined terms. A date. Then I reached the proposed redemption price for my membership interest. I read it twice. The number had dropped. Not slightly. Enough that I opened the valuation memo I had been sent earlier that year just to make sure I wasn't remembering wrong. I wasn't. Then I found the amended voting language. If I sold my 20% under the new structure, Paige's practical control increased far more than anyone had mentioned to me. There was also a proposed closing date. A closing date for a transaction I had never agreed to. I scrolled back to the email thread. My father had written, "Once Nora signs, we can clean up the rest." My mother replied 4 minutes later. "She will. She always does when it becomes about the family." Paige was not copied. I stared at that longer than I stared at the purchase price. Bad news? Priya was standing near the glass door with a coffee in each hand. I minimized the email. Family paperwork. She handed me one of the cups. That can be worse than bad news. Normally, I would have laughed. Instead, I said, "Do you have 5 minutes?" She sat across from me. I turned my laptop around, but stopped before showing her the documents. The habit was automatic. Before sharing anything, I wanted to know exactly what I had. Priya noticed. "You need a second set of eyes?" "Not yet." I looked at the file name again. "I need to know whether I'm looking at a draft or a decision they already made for me. That evening, I went home and did what I had been trained to do whenever a project stopped making sense. I built a dependency map. My townhouse was small, narrow, and entirely mine. I had bought it 18 months earlier with my own savings, a first-time homebuyer program, and a mortgage that still made me wince on the first of every month. My parents had called it a cute starter place. Paige had said the second bedroom was too small for a real guest room. I loved it anyway, especially the front door. When I bought the place, my mother had insisted on an emergency key. Family should always be able to get in, she had said. At the time, it had sounded comforting. That night, I sat at my kitchen island and opened a blank spreadsheet. I created 3 columns. Owned by me. Shared by agreement. Family assumption. Then I started filling them in. My 20% membership interest went in the first column. So did my townhouse, my checking account, my credit card, my professional credentials. Then I moved to recurring expenses, the software license Whitmore renovation used for scheduling, my card, the insurance bridge payment from 4 months earlier, my transfer, a warehouse shortfall from the previous winter, mine again, 2 payroll gaps, mine. I had always thought of those as separate emergencies, a bad month, a client delay, a payment that would be reimbursed later. When I put them on one sheet, they stopped looking like emergencies. They looked like infrastructure. I sat back and rubbed both hands over my face. My mother had called me the practical one since I was 17. The strong one gives more because she can, she liked to say. I had spent years hearing that as praise. Now it looked suspiciously like a job description. I searched my old email. A message from nearly 2 years earlier appeared. Elaine Whitmore to Robert Whitmore. I had been copied because the email contained a project budget I had helped repair. Near the bottom, my mother had written, "Paige needs confidence right now. Don't bury her in the numbers." I remembered the project. Paige had presented the revised schedule to the client. My parents had taken her to dinner afterward. I had received a text from my father. "Nice work fixing the dates." That had been enough for me then. I told myself maybe I was overreacting now. Maybe my parents planned to negotiate. Maybe Paige had seen another version. Maybe Sunday dinner would clear it up. That was the old reflex. Find the least painful explanation first. Still, I saved copies of every email that had been sent to me, every draft I had legally received, my own payment records, and the current operating agreement. I did not hack anyone's account. I did not forward myself documents I had no right to see. I simply stopped assuming the copies in my possession were harmless. By Sunday, I had enough questions to make dinner uncomfortable. I still believed questions were all I needed. My parents lived in Oak Park in a brick house they had bought before I was born. The front hallway smelled the same as it had when I was 12: lemon cleaner, old wood, and whatever my mother had cooked. Paige was already there when I arrived. She was 33 minutes late to everything except family dinners. That night, she was early. She sat at the table talking about the company's expansion while my father carved chicken. "The warehouse gives us room to run 2 more crews," she said. "Dad thinks we can be in there by November." I looked at her. "Which cash flow model are you using?" Her fork paused. "For the warehouse?" "Yes." She glanced at my mother. It lasted maybe 1 second. I noticed anyway. "We have options," Paige said. "That's not a model." My mother sighed. "Nora, can we please have one meal where you don't make everything sound like a board meeting?" I asked one question, and Paige answered it. She hadn't. I looked at my sister. Paige pushed a piece of carrot around her plate. I let it go. For another 20 minutes. After dessert, my father disappeared into his office and returned carrying a blue folder. He placed it beside my plate. "Routine restructuring." I looked at the folder. Then at him. "Routine?" "Mostly housekeeping." I didn't touch it. My mother folded her hands. "You know your father wants Paige to have more operating flexibility." "I know. And you have your own career," she continued. "You're doing wonderfully. This lets everyone focus on what they're best at." There it was, the flattering sentence before the request. I reached into my bag and placed 3 printed pages on the table. The first page of version 6, the proposed redemption price, the amended voting section. My father stopped moving. Paige leaned forward. What is that? I looked at her. You haven't seen it? She looked at my father. Then my mother. No. My mother's mouth tightened. Nora, where did you get that? It was emailed to me. That doesn't mean it was final. The file name says final. File names don't mean anything. I almost laughed. At work, I spent half my life telling people the opposite. My father put his palm over the papers. You're making this more dramatic than it needs to be. Then explain why my ownership was priced without me. We were building scenarios. With a closing date? It's a placeholder. And the new voting structure? Nora. My mother said my name, in the tone she used when she wanted the conversation moved from facts to behavior. Your father has worked 40 years for this company. That doesn't answer my question. You always do this. Do what? Turn family into numbers. I looked at the folder beside me. You turned my 20% into a number before I walked in the door. Paige whispered. I thought you were okay with this. I turned toward her. Who told you that? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. My mother jumped in. No one is stealing anything from you. I didn't say stealing. You're acting like we're criminals. I asked why there's a version 6 of an agreement when I was only shown version 3. My father's face had gone red. We are trying to keep a business moving. Then move it without pretending I already agreed. Silence. I pushed my chair back. I'm not signing tonight. My mother laughed once, without humor. No one asked you to sign tonight. Dad tapped the blue folder. Then what's that? Another silence. That one told me more than the first. I picked up my bag and the papers. My father stood. We're not done talking. I am. I walked toward the stairs. My parents' upstairs hallway opened directly over the staircase. I had left my coat in the spare room because my mother hated jackets draped over dining chairs. I went to get it. Behind me, my father kept talking. You walk out every time something gets difficult. That was almost funny. I had spent 8 years being the person they called when something got difficult. My mother followed me. Nora, give me the folder. No, you're taking documents that belong to the company. They were sent to me. You know exactly what I mean. Her fingers closed around one edge. I tightened my grip. Mom. Let go. She pulled. Not hard enough to drag me. Hard enough that I stepped backward. My father was standing near the top of the stairs. We can fix this tomorrow, he said. Move. Nora. Dad. Move. My mother pulled the folder again. I turned my shoulder away from her. My heel found nothing. For one strange second, I knew exactly what had happened before gravity did. Then the staircase came up at me. Shoulder. Hip. Head. Darkness. Sound returned before sight. My mother's shoes. My father breathing. Paige saying something I couldn't make out. Then my mother's voice. We'll tell everyone she slipped. My father answered. Good. Dead people can't tell the truth. I kept my eyes closed. I don't know how long passed before sirens arrived. My memory comes in pieces after that. A man's voice asking if I could hear him. Cold air. A collar around my neck. A bright ambulance ceiling. I opened my eyes. A paramedic leaned over me. Can you tell me your name? Nora. Last name? Whitmore. Do you know where you are? Ambulance. Good. Do you know what happened? I swallowed. My family and I argued. Did you fall? Yes. Did someone push you? The question landed cleanly. I remembered my mother's hand on the folder. My father blocking the stairs. My foot stepping backward. I don't know that anyone pushed me. He nodded and kept working. That mattered to me. I was not going to improve the truth just because the truth was ugly enough already. At the hospital, the lights were too bright and everyone moved too fast. I drifted in and out while people asked questions, checked my pupils, cut away part of my sleeve, and sent me for imaging. By the time Dr. Maya Chen introduced herself, I could answer without fighting through fog. You have a concussion, a fractured clavicle, and a lot of bruising, she said. The good news is, we're not seeing the kind of head injury we were worried about when you arrived. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Are my parents here? They've asked to come back. My heart sped up. Maya noticed. Do you want them here? No. The answer came out faster than I expected. She waited. No information to Elaine or Robert Whitmore, I said. No visitors. You're an adult and you're able to make your own decisions right now. We can restrict information and visitors. I want that. Are you afraid they'll hurt you? I thought about the question. I'm afraid of what they'll say happened before I can say what happened. That was enough. She did not ask me to explain my entire family. She did not promise to protect me forever. She told the nurse what I had requested and documented it. That was all I needed from her. Later, a nurse told me my parents had arrived and had been informed that staff could not provide information. I did not see them. I did not hear what they said. I only knew they were not allowed into my room because I had said no. It may sound like a small thing. At 25, it was the first major family decision I could remember making without explaining it until everyone else felt comfortable. The next morning, I asked whether I could speak to the officer handling the incident. A police investigator came that afternoon. He sat beside my bed with a notebook. "I want to be clear about something," he said. "Are you saying someone pushed you down the stairs?" "No." He waited. "There was an argument about business documents," I said. My mother grabbed the folder I was holding. My father was standing in my way when I tried to leave. I stepped backward and fell. Any threat? Not before I fell. And after? I looked at the blanket. I was conscious for part of it. His pen stopped. "What did you hear?" My mother said, "We'll tell everyone she slipped." He wrote. My father said, "Good. Dead people can't tell the truth." The officer looked up. "Anything else?" "No." "Do you know what he meant by the truth?" "I have an idea." "About the business documents?" "Yes." "Can you provide them?" "I can provide copies of the emails and versions that were sent to me." He nodded. I handed over nothing dramatic that afternoon. No secret recording. No confession. No murder plot. I gave him a factual statement, with a date and time attached to it. That was enough for me. My profession had taught me something my family never had. A record did not need to scream. It only needed to exist before someone tried to replace it. 4 days later, I was transferred to a rehabilitation facility. My shoulder was strapped. My head still throbbed when I stared at a screen too long. Walking across the room exhausted me. I should have been thinking about recovery. Instead, I opened the Smart Lock app for my townhouse. There was a new entry in the activity log. Elaine guest code used. I stared at the timestamp. Then another entry. 47 minutes later. Page guest code used. My parents had no death certificate. No probate order. No legal authority over my house. As far as any institution was concerned, I was alive. But my family had already started behaving as though my absence had converted everything I owned into something communal. I put the phone down. For years, I had thought my biggest problem was that my parents never saw how much I did. That afternoon, lying in a rehab bed with one arm strapped against my body, I finally understood the opposite was true. They knew exactly how much I did. They had simply mistaken my willingness for permission. And now they thought the one person who could revoke that permission was dead. For the first time since I fell, I smiled. Not because I wanted revenge. Because they were wrong. The smile lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then my shoulder reminded me where I was. A sharp pulse ran from my collarbone down my arm when I reached for the phone again, and the rehab nurse had already warned me that pain made people reckless. She meant stairs and showers. In my case, she should have included spreadsheets. Elaine's guest code had been used at my townhouse. 47 minutes later, Paige's code had followed. Those were facts. Everything else was still interpretation. That distinction mattered. At work, a bad assumption could turn a 5-day delay into a 5-week disaster because people started making decisions based on something nobody had actually confirmed. My parents had spent most of my life doing exactly that with me. Nora can cover it. Nora won't mind. Nora has savings. Nora understands. Nora always comes through. This time, I refused to add another assumption of my own. Maybe they had gone inside to check the heat. Maybe Paige had picked up something she had left there. Maybe my mother had watered the plant by the kitchen window. Possible did not mean probable, but possible still deserved its own column. So instead of calling either of them, I called Priya. She answered on the second ring. "You sound terrible." "Good morning to you too." That was concern. "It needs work." A chair creaked on her end. "How are you?" The normal question caught me harder than it should have. "Not." What happened? Not, what are your parents saying? Not, what does this mean for the company? How are you? My head hurts, I said. My shoulder hates gravity. Physical therapy starts this afternoon. And emotionally? I have a spreadsheet. That bad? A laugh slipped out before I could stop it. Then the laugh pulled at my shoulder, and I regretted being amused. I need a favor, I said. Priya's voice changed. Not dramatically, just enough to tell me she was listening more carefully. What kind? My townhouse is mine. Only mine. My mother has an emergency key, and the guest codes I gave them are still active. Okay. I want the codes revoked. I want the locks changed. She waited. I can schedule the locksmith, I continued. I can verify ownership. I can pay for it. I just can't physically be there. You want me to let the locksmith in? Yes. Nothing else. Done. Priya. I heard the nothing else. I mean it. Don't look through drawers. Don't photograph every room. Don't turn this into an investigation. I was going to stand by the door, drink bad coffee, and make sure no stranger walks away with your television. That's exactly the level of heroism I'm requesting. Finally, reasonable expectations. After we hung up, I pulled up the deed and mortgage documents stored in my home folder. Only my name appeared. No parental contribution. No co-owner. No tenancy agreement. The down payment had come from years of saving plus a first-time homebuyer assistance program I had qualified for on my own. That mattered, because boundaries were easier when they did not require interpretation. My mother had a key because I had given her one. Permission could be withdrawn. At 10:14 that morning, every guest code disappeared from the smart lock app. At 11:37, the locksmith sent confirmation. At 11:42, Priya called me on video. Her face appeared first, then my front hallway. Seeing my own house through someone else's phone made my stomach tighten. Nothing looked destroyed. No drawers dumped onto the floor. No broken glass. The umbrella stand still leaned slightly to the left because I kept forgetting to tighten one of its screws. Want me to walk through? Priya asked. Slowly. The camera moved into the living room. Couch. Lamp. Bookshelf. The blue ceramic bowl where I dropped loose change. Everything ordinary. Then the kitchen. Stop. Priya froze. Pan left. The old wooden binder I kept on top of the refrigerator was gone. It had once held scheduling printouts, handwritten cost notes, vendor corrections, and rough project plans from the years when Whitmore renovations still relied on me heavily enough that I practically kept a second office in my parents' house. My mother had called it clutter. You still keep that junk? She had asked the last time she saw it. Apparently, someone had changed their opinion of junk. Anything else? Priya asked. Bedroom. She went upstairs. The little walnut box that held my grandmother's watch was missing from the dresser. So were a few pieces of silverware from the dining cabinet downstairs. Small things. Specific things. Not random. Should I call the police? Priya asked. Not yet. Nora. They had permission to enter before I revoked it. I don't know who took what. I know 2 codes were used. That's all. You sound like work. That's intentional. Priya stared at me through the screen. Write it down, then. Already had. Date. Approximate time. Item. Last known location. Access log. No accusations. No conclusions. The missing silver made me angry. The watch made me sad. The binder made me curious. That was the one I could not stop thinking about. Why take records my mother had spent years dismissing as my obsessive little notebooks? By mid-afternoon, the first answer arrived from a different direction. Physical therapy lasted 40 minutes and left me feeling as if I had run a marathon, using only muscles nobody had bothered to name. Back in my room, I opened my banking apps. For 6 years, money had left my accounts in ways that felt harmless individually. $180 here. $900 there. 1 emergency transfer. 1 software renewal. 1 insurance payment my father promised to reimburse. The amounts were never large enough alone to force a confrontation. Together, they had become a quiet tax on being the reliable daughter. This time, I treated every connection like an access point on a project. My personal checking account stayed untouched. The credit card was different. Years earlier, I had added my mother as an authorized user for groceries and errands during a period when my father had surgery and I was traveling constantly for work. The card was still active. So was her user status. I removed it, changed the password, requested a replacement number. Then I moved through the recurring payments. The scheduling software used by Whitmore Renovation was charged to my card. Cancelled at renewal. A monthly transfer into an account my parents used for miscellaneous business expenses. Stopped. A storage-related payment that had somehow survived 3 separate temporary arrangements. Stopped. Nothing belonging to them moved into my account. No shared funds vanished. No business account was touched. I simply stopped paying bills that were mine only because I had never said no. When the list was finished, the monthly total sat at the bottom of my screen. It was more than my car payment. Less than my mortgage. Enough to matter. For several minutes, I just stared at the number. Then I opened a fresh budgeting sheet. Mortgage. Utilities. Medical expenses. Transportation. Groceries. Savings. A line for physical therapy costs that insurance might not cover. I reached the bottom automatically and typed, Family Reserve. My fingers stayed over the keyboard. That category had existed in some form since I was 19. Not always under that name. Emergency. Mom and Dad. Whitmore. Page. Buffer. Different labels. Same purpose. Money kept ready in case somebody else's choices became my responsibility. I deleted the line. The blank space bothered me. Then it didn't. The first voicemail came the following morning. My phone had been powered off for most of the previous week, and I had deliberately left the old number untouched because people revealed interesting things when they believed nobody was listening. My mother's voice filled the room. Nora's card isn't working. I tried the software renewal twice. A pause. Then my father, farther from the phone. Maybe the bank got notified. My grip tightened around the edge of the blanket. Nobody had notified a bank that I was dead. Nobody could. There was no death certificate because I was alive. My father was guessing. The voicemail continued. Paige spoke next. Notified by who? There isn't even a death certificate. For a second, I forgot to breathe. Elaine answered quickly. That's not the point. The point is we need to cover the software and the insurance. Then, Paige asked the question I had been waiting for without knowing it. Why was Nora paying those? The message ended shortly afterward. I replayed only that line. Why was Nora paying those? Not how much? Not since when? Why? Maybe Paige was performing ignorance. Maybe she had known all along and was suddenly worried about liability. Both were possible. But her confusion at dinner had looked real, and now I had a second data point. One event was noise. 2 were worth watching. By the third, I would call it a pattern. That afternoon provided the third. An email came from a project administrator at Whitmore Renovation. The woman had worked there for years and knew me mostly as Robert's daughter, who occasionally fixed schedules. The subject line was, Credential Confirmation. She wrote that one of the proposal templates still contained the phrase, Project Controls, supported by Whitmore Family Leadership. A prospective client had asked whether that meant I was actively involved. The administrator wanted to know what she should say. I read the email twice, then searched my files. The wording appeared in multiple old templates. Not a direct lie. Worse, in some ways, a useful blur. It let people assume my experience stood behind work I had never reviewed. Before the fall, I probably would have called Dad. He would have said it was harmless. Mom would have said I was being territorial. Paige would have promised to update it later. Later was where boundaries went to die. I wrote the response myself. I stated that I did not currently provide project controls services to Whitmore Renovation, that no proposal should imply my review or approval without direct written confirmation from me, and that my professional credentials should not be used as support for current project representations. No accusation. No editorializing. No mention of the stairs. Then I sent the draft to Priya. Her response came 10 minutes later. Third sentence is doing too much. Cut it. Facts are enough. She was right. I removed the extra explanation. Hit send. Something in my chest loosened. For years, I had believed protecting my reputation required proving my parents were wrong. It didn't. Sometimes it only required saying what was true and refusing to decorate it. That evening, the dependency map got bigger. I pulled old records from my own files and began attaching dates to the favors I remembered. A schedule recovery for a kitchen remodel project Paige had presented to a client. A budget cleanup after she approved upgraded materials without updating allowances. A vendor dispute I had untangled on a Saturday because Robert said Paige was too good with people to get buried in detail. 2 proposal revisions. 3 late-night calls. One weekend when I canceled plans because a project milestone had slipped and everyone insisted the client meeting Monday was make or break. Paige had stood in front of the client. I had rebuilt the schedule. My parents took her to dinner. Dad texted me afterward. Nice work fixing the date. At the time, I had saved the message because I was grateful. Now it looked smaller than I remembered. The point was not that Paige had done nothing. She was good with clients. Better than me, honestly. She could walk into a room of irritated homeowners and leave with half of them laughing. But skill in one area had been turned into proof she deserved protection from every other area. Mine had been turned into proof I could absorb whatever she did not handle. By midnight, I had a rough estimate of what Whitmore Renovation would spend each year if it paid market rates for the scheduling, cost tracking, proposal corrections, and software I had been quietly covering. The number was uncomfortable, not catastrophic. That mattered. The company would not collapse without me. It would just become more expensive to operate honestly. That realization brought a relief I had not expected. Walking away did not mean burning down my parents' business. It meant letting the business carry its own weight. The following morning, I searched the email thread from nearly 2 years earlier. The line about Paige needing confidence had been bothering me. I found it, then scrolled higher. The full exchange was worse. My father had complained that a project had gone over budget, and Paige was already upset about a client confrontation. Elaine replied, Paige doesn't need to know how much Nora is carrying. She needs confidence right now. Nora can handle the numbers until Paige grows into the role. I read it once. Then again. The timestamp was almost 2 years old. Not a bad week. Not a temporary crisis. Not one parent trying to spare one child from stress. A system. My mother had known exactly what I was carrying. She had deliberately decided Paige should not. Something settled into place. For days, I had been trying to solve the wrong problem. I kept asking how much Paige knew. The more useful question was who benefited from keeping her from knowing. Elaine did. A daughter who believed she was naturally succeeding remained easy to praise. A daughter who believed she was naturally strong remained easy to burden. One got confidence. The other got numbers. My mother could call both arrangements love. A knock at my rehab room interrupted the thought. The therapist leaned in. Ready? No. She smiled. Good answer. We're still going. That day, she had me practice standing from a chair without using my good arm for leverage. The first attempt was ugly. The second was worse. By the 5th, my legs shook. Again, she said. I almost snapped at her. Then stopped. No, she blinked. I need 2 minutes. Okay. That simple response nearly undid me. No guilt, no lecture, no reminder that other people were counting on me. I had said I needed 2 minutes, so I got 2 minutes. It was ridiculous that this felt new. Back in my room, I left the family voicemails unheard for the rest of the afternoon. I ate dinner, watched half an episode of a cooking show, moved some money from the amount I had been sending to my parents into my own emergency savings. Nothing dramatic happened. The building did not shake. Nobody appeared to revoke my membership in the human race. My mother arrived at the townhouse the next morning. I knew because the doorbell camera sent an alert. Her face filled my screen. She carried her purse under one arm and my old emergency key in the other hand. For a few seconds, she stood with her back to the camera. Then she tried the lock. Once, twice. The key no longer turned. She stepped back and looked at it, then tried the keypad. The old code failed. Elaine pressed it again. Failed. Again. Failed. My phone rang less than a minute later. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice came through later. Someone changed Nora's locks. Someone. Not Nora. Not the homeowner. Someone. Even while believing I was gone, My mother could imagine an outside force changing my home more easily than she could imagine me making a decision she had not approved. She continued speaking, apparently to my father. We need to find out who authorized this. I paused the recording. The answer sat on the screen in my hand. I had no permission, no family vote, no discussion, just ownership. For the first time since waking in the ambulance, the thought did not frighten me. It felt clean. That evening, an email appeared in the old account I still monitored. The sender was Paige. She had written to our mother and copied Dad. Maybe she assumed the address was simply becoming part of some future estate process. Maybe she wrote it because she wanted the question preserved somewhere. I could not know. The message itself was enough. Mom, what exactly was Nora paying for? A second line followed. And why am I being asked to sign a personal guarantee now? My eyes stayed on those words. Personal guarantee. There it was. The load had not disappeared when I did. It had moved. And for the first time in her life, Paige could feel its weight. The personal guarantee changed the question. Until then, everything I had found pointed backward. Old payments, old emails, old projects where I had cleaned up a problem and Paige had presented the result. The guarantee pointed forward. Whatever role I had occupied in Whitmore renovation had not disappeared when my parents decided I was dead. It was being reassigned. For most of the morning, Paige's email stayed open on my screen. Mom, what exactly was Nora paying for? And why am I being asked to sign a personal guarantee now? A personal guarantee meant the warehouse risk would no longer stop at the company. Someone would be putting their own name behind it. My parents had tried variations of that conversation with me before. Never all at once. Never with the words arranged so cleanly. Dad would call and say a lender needed a little reassurance. Mom would tell me it was temporary. Then one of them would remind me that I owned part of the company anyway, as if ownership and unlimited responsibility were the same thing. I had always found a reason not to sign the worst versions. But I had also kept doing enough around the edges that they never had to confront what my refusal really meant. Now there was no Nora around the edges. So the risk had moved. I called Aunt Joan. She was my mother's younger sister, and one of those relatives who knew almost everything without ever admitting she knew enough to take a position. For years, Joan had helped Whitmore renovation with bookkeeping a few hours a week. She was not an accountant. She was organized, careful, and very good at saying things like, "That's between you and your mother." The phone rang 5 times. Then she answered, "Hello? It's me." Nothing. Then a sharp inhale. "Nora." "Yes." "Oh my God. Please don't call Mom." That stopped whatever was coming next. Joan lowered her voice. "Where are you?" "I'm safe. Are you in the hospital?" "I'm recovering." "What happened?" "Your mother said." I know what she said. Another pause. "You're alive." "Yes." A strange laugh escaped her. Then she started crying. I let her. For once, I did not rush to manage somebody else's reaction. When her breathing settled, she said, "Elaine thinks you died." "I know. Does Paige know?" "No." "Robert?" "No." "Nora, you have to tell them." The old reflex rose automatically. Explain. Reassure. Reduce everyone else's discomfort. Instead, I looked at Paige's email. "I'll decide when." Joan went quiet again. That was new. Usually, if an older relative told me what I had to do, I softened the sentence until it sounded like my own idea. This time I let it remain hers. "I need to ask you some questions," I said. "About what?" "The company." A tired sound came through the phone. "Of course, who knew about the payroll gaps last winter?" "Your father." "Mom?" "Yes." "Paige?" Joan hesitated. "I don't think so." "Why not?" She was dealing with the Marlowe job. "That wasn't my question." "Joan Seahill." "Your mother didn't want her worrying." I wrote that down. Who knew I covered the scheduling software? I did. Who else? Elaine. Robert. Paige? I assumed she knew. Did you ever hear her say she knew? No. That went into a different column. What about the Henderson project? The budget overrun. I remember that one. Who decided Paige shouldn't see the full overrun before the client meeting? A longer pause. Your mother. The answer came quietly. What did she say? Joan resisted. I don't want to make this worse. It already happened. I'm asking what you heard. She said. Paige panicked when there were too many numbers at once. My pen stopped. Exact words? As close as I remember. Paige panics. Nora handles pressure better. There it was again. Not evil. Not dramatic. Almost reasonable. That was what made it so effective. A flattering sentence could carry an ugly amount of weight. What did you think when she said that? Joan was silent long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, she said, I thought she was complimenting you. So did I. That answer hurt more than I expected. Not because Joan had betrayed some secret loyalty. Because she had seen exactly what I had seen. And we had both named it praise. Did anyone ever ask whether I wanted to handle it? No. The answer was immediate this time. I closed my eyes. Joan spoke first. Your mother grew up doing the same thing. I opened them again. What? Grandma put a lot on Elaine. More than she should have. Your mother watched the younger kids, handled bills when your grandfather was out of work, covered things up so nobody outside knew they were struggling. I had heard pieces of that story before. Always presented as evidence of my mother's strength. Joan continued. She used to say that was what kept everyone together. And did it? I don't know. That was probably the most honest thing Aunt Joan had ever said to me. Understanding where my mother learned the rule did not make the rule less damaging. It only gave it an origin. People inherited furniture, recipes, eye color. Apparently, we also inherited job descriptions nobody remembered agreeing to. Before hanging up, Joan said, What are you going to do? I haven't decided. That doesn't sound like you. No. For the first time, it sounded exactly like me. Later that afternoon, another voicemail arrived from Paige. Her voice was tighter than before. Mom says if I'm really ready to lead, I need to sign the warehouse guarantee personally. She paused. She keeps saying you would have done it. The message ended. The next one came 3 hours later. Dad wants me handling the vendor disputes now. He said someone has to be the adult. I listened to that one twice. Not because I enjoyed hearing Paige struggle. I didn't. There had been years when some small, bitter part of me imagined what it would feel like if she finally had to carry what I carried. The answer turned out to be disappointing. It did not feel like justice. It felt like watching a machine reach for the next available hand. For years, Paige had been protected from the unpleasant parts of responsibility and praised for thriving without them. Now, my parents were asking her to absorb the exact risks they had once called evidence of my strength. The system had not changed. It had simply run out of Nora. That realization followed me into physical therapy the next morning. The therapist led me toward a short practice staircase with 4 steps. I stopped at the bottom. My body reacted before my mind did. Shoulders tight, breath shallow, a quick flash of polished wood, and my mother's hand closing around the folder. You want to skip it today? The therapist asked. I hated the question, because part of me wanted to say yes. Instead, I gripped the rail. 1 step. That works. The first step hurt. Not badly. Enough. The second made my calf shake. At the third, the room seemed too bright. Stop, I said. She stopped. No lecture. No disappointment. No reminder that I was almost there. We waited. After a minute, I took the 4th step. Nothing cinematic happened. No music. No revelation. I was simply standing 4 steps higher than before. That afternoon, I was cleared to spend a few hours at my townhouse as part of preparing for discharge. Priya drove me. She carried my bag despite my protest, then ignored me when I protested again. Inside, the place smelled faintly dusty. The new lock clicked behind us. For several minutes, I just stood in the kitchen. No blue folder. No phone ringing. No client issue from Whitmore Renovation. No mother reminding me that Paige had a lot going on. My calendar was still open on the refrigerator tablet. Sunday evening showed a recurring block. Whitmore Sunday Review, 6 p.m. I had created it years earlier, after Dad complained that trying to reach me during the week was impossible. It was supposed to be 30 minutes. It regularly became 2 hours. My finger hovered over the event. Delete recurring series? The screen asked for confirmation. I pressed yes. The empty Sunday looked almost wrong. So I tapped the space and typed one word. Open. Priya saw it from across the kitchen. You scheduling nothing now? Apparently. Bold career move. I'm trying something experimental. She smiled. What? Not Priya assigning all my free time to emergencies that haven't happened yet. That'll never catch on. For the first time since the fall, the townhouse felt like a place I lived rather than an asset I needed to defend. That feeling lasted until we opened my laptop. The business analysis I had started in rehab still needed one thing: perspective. I knew what I had paid. What I did not know was whether my anger was inflating the importance of my contribution. That possibility bothered me enough that I wanted someone else to check the math. Priya sat beside me at the kitchen island while I walked through the spreadsheet. Scheduling work, proposal revisions, software, cost tracking, late-night recovery plans, my recurring transfers. She did not add anything, did not make assumptions. Whenever she questioned a line, I had to produce support for it or remove it. By the end, the number was lower than my first estimate. That made me trust it more. Priya leaned back. So what? What does this tell you? I looked at the total. If they replace the work properly, operating costs go up. By enough to kill the company? No. Enough to kill the expansion? Maybe, or delay it. She closed the laptop. How does that feel? I considered lying. Relieving. That surprised both of us. I had spent days worrying that withdrawing support meant destroying something employees depended on. The numbers said otherwise. Whitmore Renovation could survive without me. It would just have to pay the actual cost of running itself. That distinction mattered. I was not setting fire to a building. I was leaving the electric bill on the desk of the person who used the lights. That night, back at rehab, I opened Paige's first email again. Then the second voicemail. Then the email from my mother about hiding the numbers. For nearly an hour, I tried to decide whether telling Paige I was alive would be a mistake. Keeping the secret gave me leverage. As long as my parents believed I was gone, they acted without preparing for my objections. Every email became cleaner evidence. Every attempt to shift responsibility exposed something. But Paige was now being asked to sign a personal guarantee, partly because everyone believed I was unavailable. If I stayed quiet solely to gather more proof, I would be allowing her to walk closer to a decision I already understood. That did not sit right. Not because she had earned protection. Because I had decided I would not become the kind of person who let someone step into a trap just because they had once benefited from mine. There was another problem. I wanted something from her. That was harder to admit. A piece of me wanted Paige to read everything and choose me. Wanted her to call our mother a liar. Wanted her to say she had always known something was wrong. Wanted one person from my childhood to confirm that I had not imagined the imbalance. If I sent the evidence with instructions, I could probably push her toward that response. That was exactly why I decided not to. The package was small. Copies of the payment summary. The relevant section of the operating agreement. The email where my mother wrote that Paige did not need to know how much I was carrying. A short explanation of the guarantee issue, limited to what I knew from my own past. Then a note. I rewrote it 6 times. The final version was 4 lines. I'm alive. I'm safe. I'm not coming back to fix this. What you do with the truth is your decision. No location. No accusation. No demand that she keep my secret. Priya helped arrange track delivery because I still was not driving. That was all. The choice remained mine. The next afternoon, my phone rang from a number I did not recognize. I almost let it go, then answered. Hello? Breathing. Then Paige. Are you really alive? Yes. A sound came through the phone that I could not name. Not quite a sob. Not quite a laugh. Jesus Nora. I know. You're alive. Yes. Where are you? Safe. That's not an answer. It's the one I'm giving. She went quiet. Then her voice changed. Why didn't you tell me? The old version of me would have apologized first. Instead, I watched sunlight crawl across the rehab room floor. Because I needed one decision in my life that wasn't made around what this family needed next. That's not fair. Maybe not. You let me think you were dead. I didn't tell you I was dead. No. You just disappeared. I was injured. And Mom. Paige. She stopped. I'm not doing this if the conversation is about making what happened easier for Mom. Another pause. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Did you know about the guarantee? I knew they tried versions of the same thing with me. Dad said it's normal. Personal guarantees can be normal. That doesn't make them harmless. He said if I believe in the company, I should sign. What do you believe? I don't know. That answer sounded more frightened than anything else she had said. They keep telling me you would have done it. I didn't. What? I didn't sign the versions they wanted me to sign. But you paid for everything. Not everything. You know what I mean. Yes. She exhaled. I thought the company was paying for the software. It wasn't. The insurance? The bridge payment was mine. The payroll? 2 gaps. Both mine. Both supposed to be temporary. Nothing came back for several seconds. Then, why didn't you tell me? That question was different from the first one. This time, she was not asking why I had hidden being alive. She was asking about the years before. I tried to talk about costs. You made everything sound complicated. No. Mom told you the numbers were complicated. Paige did not answer. I continued. You were in the room for some of those conversations. You changed the subject too. That's not the same as knowing. No. I let the next part sit between us before saying it. But you liked the version where you didn't have to ask. Her breathing changed. For a second, I expected the call to end. It didn't. When Paige finally spoke, there was no defense in her voice. Probably. That was more accountability than I had expected. Not enough to erase anything. Enough to continue. What do you want me to do? She asked. There it was. The question I had secretly wanted. Choose me. Tell Mom no. Expose Dad. Give back the praise. Say I was right. Every answer rose at once. Instead I said, nothing for me. What does that mean? It means I'm not giving you a new assignment. But what am I supposed to do? Decide what you're willing to carry when I'm not underneath it. Nora, I mean it. You're just leaving me with this? Yes. That's kind of awful. Maybe. A tired laugh escaped her. You really changed. No. I looked at the brace around my shoulder. I think I stopped doing one thing. What? Taking every problem somebody hands me before checking whose name is actually on it. Paige was quiet. Then she said, Mom is planning something. My stomach tightened. What? A remembrance dinner. The phrase sounded wrong. A what? She won't call it a funeral because there's no certificate. She says it's private. Staff, relatives, some longtime clients. Of course there was no certificate. That detail mattered to Paige now. What's the purpose? She says people need closure. And she wants to announce the transition. There it was. Closure for me. Continuity for the company. The two had been packaged together. After the call ended, I checked my old email. A draft announcement had arrived less than an hour earlier from Whitmore Renovations' general account. I read it slowly. A memorial plaque bearing my name. An annual scholarship for young women entering construction management. Page continuing. The legacy Nora helped build. For a few seconds, the scholarship got me. At 25, I should have been too young to care about a plaque. Apparently I wasn't. There was something painfully seductive about seeing my name attached to gratitude. A public acknowledgement. A sentence saying I had built something. All the things I had wanted while alive. Available now that I was supposedly unable to object. Near the bottom, another line appeared. The company anticipated, finalizing the ownership transition consistent with Nora's previously expressed wishes. My previously expressed wishes. I had expressed exactly one relevant wish. I was not signing version 6. The scholarship stopped feeling generous. It started feeling like a receipt. Honor in exchange for absence. My phone buzzed. Paige. Mom moved the dinner to Friday. A second message. She says I sign the guarantee and accept the new role on stage. Then one more. 4 days. I opened my calendar. Friday was empty. For years, an empty square had meant available. That night, for the first time, I understood it could mean something else. Mine. 4 days sounded like a deadline. That was probably why my brain responded to it better than my emotions did. By 8 the next morning, I had turned Friday into a sequence instead of a threat. The first thing I opened was not Paige's text. It was the operating agreement. The copy had been sitting in my records for 3 years, mostly ignored because until version 6 appeared, my 20% interest had felt more symbolic than useful. That morning, I read every section that dealt with transfer, redemption, voting, and amendments. Then I read them again. Nothing in those pages said my parents could convert silence into consent. Nothing said my disappearance transferred my interest to Paige. Nothing said a memorial dinner could substitute for my signature. The proposed redemption required me, not my memory, not my parents' interpretation of what I supposedly wanted, me. So I wrote a notice. Short sentences. No accusations. No mention of the stairs. No mention of my mother. I stated that I had not consented to the proposed redemption of my membership interest, had not approved version 6 of the agreement, had not authorized anyone to communicate consent on my behalf, and did not authorize any transfer, amendment, or representation based on presumed wishes. The first draft ran almost 3 pages. The final version was less than 1. Priya read it over video during her lunch break. You cut the angry paragraph. There was no angry paragraph. There were 6 sentences wearing business casual. I deleted another line. Better? Much. Anything factually wrong? No. That was all I needed from her. The operating agreement told me where company notices were supposed to go. I sent the notice there, copied the members, saved the transmission receipts, and mailed a signed copy by tracked delivery. Then I created one final chronology for myself. Version 3, received. Version 6, discovered. Email stating I would sign. Sunday dinner. Refusal. Fall. Police statement. Access changes. Financial support stopped. Professional correction sent. Non-consent delivered. 9 lines. No adjectives. The simplicity steadied me. By lunchtime, something important had changed. Friday could still be humiliating. My mother could still put my photograph on a wall and tell people what I had believed. My father could still describe my labor as devotion. Paige could still sign whatever they placed in front of her, but they could not use that room to take my ownership. They could only use it to show what they had planned to do with my absence. The distinction felt enormous. For the first time since the fall, I had secured something before the confrontation rather than hoping I could defend it during one. That afternoon, another kind of return began. My supervisor had approved a gradual schedule, and my first half-day back was remote. At 9 the following morning, I opened my work laptop from the dining table. Not the one filled with Whitmore documents. My real work computer. A hospital renovation project waited where I had left it. There were 46 unread emails, which was almost comforting. Construction had continued without me. No one had collapsed because Nora Whitmore had been unavailable. Priya messaged me. Welcome back. Don't be heroic. I typed. Offensive. I was planning to save all of commercial construction before lunch. Her reply came immediately. 2-hour limit. I smiled and opened a change order log. One subcontractor had submitted a schedule impact that did not match the dates in the supporting correspondence. The problem was ordinary, almost boring. It was wonderful. For 90 minutes, I tracked dates, compared revisions, and wrote questions nobody would interpret as disloyalty. No one told me I was difficult for noticing a mismatch. No one said numbers were less important than somebody's confidence. When I found the missing dependency, I sent a note to the project manager. He replied, "Good catch. Update the log and we'll address it tomorrow." That was it. Good catch. Not, "You're the only one who can handle this." Not, "We knew you'd fix it." A task. A contribution. A paycheck. By noon, fatigue had begun gathering behind my eyes. The old Nora would have ignored it. The newer version looked at the clock. I saved the file. Closed the laptop. My hand hovered over the lid for a moment because stopping while work remained unfinished still felt vaguely irresponsible. Then I shut it. The building did not collapse. Another experiment successfully completed. Thursday afternoon, Paige sent me a photograph. A stack of papers sat on what looked like our father's desk. The top page read, "Personal guarantee." Below that was a management responsibility acknowledgement. Her message followed. "Mom says these are just to formalize Friday." Then another. Did they ever make you sign these? I looked at the photograph carefully. I can't tell you what to sign, I wrote back. 3 dots appeared. Stopped. Returned. That's not what I asked. Fair. They asked me to sign similar guarantees. I declined. This time, her reply took longer. Mom said you always backed the company personally. I supported expenses. That is not the same thing. A minute passed. Why would she tell me that? My thumb rested over the keyboard. Because she needs another Nora. Because the machine is hungry. Because you were allowed to believe leadership meant receiving authority without absorbing risk. All of those were interpretations. So I gave Paige what I could support. Ask her which document she means. Ask for the signed copy. Paige sent a thumbs up. Nothing else. That evening, I laid out clothes for Friday. I did it without deciding to. Black pants. A dark green blouse I could pull on without fighting my injured shoulder. Low shoes. Nothing dramatic. No red dress. No cinematic resurrection costume. Just clothes that would not hurt. The outfit sat on the back of my bedroom chair while I reheated soup. Every few minutes, my eyes returned to it. By 7, I had imagined the entrance in at least 6 versions. The door opens. My mother stops speaking. Dad drops the papers. Paige turns around. People whisper. Then I cross the room and say something devastatingly concise. The fantasy embarrassed me because it felt good. Not just good. Earned. They had spoken about me as if I were an obstacle that had conveniently stopped breathing. They were preparing to place my name on a plaque while finishing the transaction I had refused. Surely I was entitled to one moment of watching them lose control. My phone buzzed. Priya. How's the shoulder? Attached to me. Still objecting. Dinner tomorrow? I knew which dinner she meant. Maybe. She called instead of texting. You're going? I didn't say that. You laid out clothes, didn't you? I stared at the bedroom chair. How do you know things? You organize emotions with office supplies. Clothing is just a textile version of a checklist. That is insulting. Is it inaccurate? I carried the phone into the living room. No. Priya was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, if you go, what do you want from the room? Truth? That's already in writing. I hated how quickly she answered. Maybe I want them to stop lying. Can you make them? No. Then what do you want from the room? The answer came before I had time to improve it. I want to see their faces. There it was. Ugly in its honesty. Priya did not tell me not to go. That helped. If she had said, be the bigger person, I might have driven there out of spite. Instead, she said, okay. Okay, you're allowed to want that. The pressure in my chest eased slightly. But? I asked. No, but. You definitely have a but. I have a question. Of course you do. If you never see their faces, does any of what you already did become less true? The room went very still. My lock was changed. My money was mine. My professional name was corrected. My non-consent existed. The police statement existed. The operating agreement had not changed because my mother wanted it to. My return to work plan did not require anybody at Whitmore Renovation to approve it. No, I said. Priya let the answer sit. After we hung up, I carried the green blouse back to the closet. The shoes followed. My car keys stayed on the hook by the kitchen. Friday evening arrived quietly. That almost annoyed me. The sky did not darken dramatically. Thunder did not roll across Chicago. Nothing announced that my parents were about to hold a remembrance dinner for a daughter who was sitting at home eating grilled cheese. At 6:12, Paige sent a link. They're streaming part of it for the field staff who couldn't come. You don't have to watch. I stared at the message, then opened it. The video showed a banquet room at a small hotel near Oak Park. That was all I allowed myself to know directly. Round tables, a lectern, a screen with my photograph on it. The picture was from a company holiday dinner 2 years earlier. Paige had been cropped from the original image, which struck me as almost funny considering how many times the reverse had happened. My mother stepped to the microphone. I turned the volume up. Nora always believed family came before everything. My stomach tightened. Elaine continued speaking, but I muted the stream. The sentence was enough. Of course, that was the version of me she needed. Not Nora, who said no. Not Nora, who owned 20%. Not Nora, who had asked why version 6 existed. A dead daughter was easier to love because a dead daughter could not revise the doctrine. I closed the live stream. For the next 20 minutes, nothing happened. At least nothing I knew about. That distinction had become important. No imagining the room. No inventing expressions. No narrating private conversations because they probably occurred. I washed my plate. Took my evening medication. Answered one work email and then remembered I had promised myself not to. Closed the laptop again. At 6:58, Paige sent a photograph. The personal guarantee lay on a table beside the management acknowledgement. No signature. Her message read, "She put them in front of me 10 minutes before I'm supposed to speak." Another appeared. "I asked if you ever signed one." Then, she said, "Nora understood duty." I sat down. That sentence connected years of my life more efficiently than any spreadsheet could. Nora understood duty. Meaning Nora did not ask what risk belonged to whom. Nora did not embarrass anyone by refusing publicly. Nora did not demand that the person receiving authority also receive responsibility. And now that Nora was supposedly gone, duty needed a new address. Paige sent one more message. I asked for the signed copy. She didn't give me one. I typed slowly. Then you have your answer about what I signed. Nothing came back. For almost 15 minutes, the phone stayed dark. Then the live stream notification appeared again. Paige was speaking. I opened it. Her face looked pale under the banquet room lights. A printed speech sat on the lectern. She touched it once, then set it aside. "I was supposed to talk tonight about continuing Nora's work," she said. My breathing slowed. "I can't do that yet." Somebody moved off camera. Paige looked toward the side of the room. "Before I accept anything, I need to know what actually belonged to Nora." My mother's voice came from somewhere outside the frame. "Paige, tonight isn't the time." The microphone caught it. Paige looked down for a second, then back up. That's what we always told her. The room itself remained mostly outside the camera angle. I could hear a chair move. A cough. Nothing else I could reliably name. Paige continued. "I'm not signing the guarantee tonight. I'm not accepting the operations role tonight. And I'm not going to stand here and say Nora wanted something when I haven't seen anything she signed saying she wanted it." My hand covered my mouth. Not because she had chosen me. She hadn't. That was what made it matter. She was choosing not to step where I had stood. The old me would have wanted more. Expose the email. Read the payment totals. Tell everyone Elaine had hidden the numbers. Say my name and announce that I was alive. Paige did none of those things. She simply refused. "I'm not taking over something that only works if one daughter disappears inside it." Then she stepped away from the lectern. The stream ended less than a minute later. I remained on my couch with the phone in my hand. No applause reached me. No view of my father. No image of my mother's face. And strangely, I did not need one. The most important thing that had happened in that room had already happened before Paige stood up. My ownership was protected. My support had stopped. My access had changed. My name had been corrected. That evening did not create my freedom. It only revealed what happened when the old system tried to run without me. Paige called 43 minutes later. "You watched?" "Part of it. Mom says I humiliated her." "You said no." "That's your response?" "Yes." She said I blindsided her in front of employees. "Did you know the guarantee was coming?" "No." "Then who blindsided who?" Paige made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "I feel awful." "I know. Is that what it feels like?" "What?" Saying no. I looked at the dark window across from me. At first, pretty terrible. That's encouraging. It gets less dramatic. "You've had, what, 2 weeks of practice?" "Apparently, I'm gifted." That actually made her laugh. Then her voice changed. Aunt Joan came up to me afterward. "What did she say?" "That I should have asked questions sooner." "Anything else?" "She said she should have said something years ago." My phone buzzed while Paige was still talking. A message from Joan. "I should have said something years ago. I'm sorry." Same sentence. 2 sources. I did not need more. My reply to Joan was short. "You can say something next time." No absolution. No punishment. Just a future responsibility that belonged to her. Paige went quiet on the phone. Then she said, "I'm telling them." My fingers tightened around the phone. "What?" That you're alive. For weeks, I had controlled that information because I needed room to recover and act before anyone could surround me with explanations, pressure, or papers. That work was done. Not all of it. Enough. Okay. You're okay with that? Yes. Where are you? I'm not giving them that yet. What should I say? Tell them I'm safe. That's it? Tell them I'm recovering. Don't give them my address or the rehab facility. They know your house. They know an address. That doesn't mean the door opens. Paige exhaled. Right. That single word told me she understood more than she had a week earlier. After the call, I sat in the quiet for a long time. The secret had served its purpose. If my entire plan still depended on my parents believing I was dead, then I had not really rebuilt anything. Privacy had given me time. It was not supposed to become another cage. The next morning, after medical clearance and a long list of instructions, I returned to my townhouse for good. Not healed. Not finished. Home. My overnight bag sat beside the stairs. I left it there. No need to prove anything by carrying it up immediately. Coffee was brewing when the doorbell camera notification appeared. Movement at front door. My mother filled the screen. Dad stood a few feet behind her. For a moment, neither moved. Then, Elaine reached into her purse. The emergency key. I watched her put it into the lock. It did not turn. She tried again. Then the keypad. Old code. Red light. Again. Red. The doorbell rang. My pulse jumped so hard I could feel it in my injured shoulder. The phone rang next. Mom. I did not answer. Another doorbell. Then a text. Paige told us. Open the door. My thumb hovered over the screen. The old rules were all inside those 4 words. We know. We came. Open. No question. No permission. No acknowledgement that the house belonged to me. I typed carefully. I'm alive. I'm recovering. Any necessary communication can be in writing. Her reply came almost immediately. Open this door. The bell rang again. I stood in the hallway looking at the front door. For 25 years, someone in that house had always decided what being a good daughter required next. Answer. Pay. Fix. Carry. Explain. Open. My coffee machine beeped from the kitchen. I turned away from the door and walked toward it instead. The coffee tasted terrible. I drank it anyway. By the time the mug was half empty, the doorbell had stopped. The camera showed my mother still standing on the porch, arms folded across her chest. Dad had moved closer to the sidewalk. Neither of them knew I was watching. That was different from knowing what they were thinking. For years, I had filled in those blanks automatically. Mom must be worried. Dad must be scared. Paige probably didn't mean it that way. I had done emotional forecasting for everyone around me and called it empathy. That morning, I stuck to observable facts. My mother tried the door. The key did not work. She asked me to open it. I declined. After another few minutes, they left. Nothing exploded. No one collapsed on the porch. No police car arrived. The front door remained closed, and my house remained mine. 20 minutes later, the emails started. Mom wrote first. How could you let us think you were dead? Dad followed 8 minutes later. This has gone far enough. We need to talk in person. I read both messages at the kitchen table, then waited until my pulse slowed before answering. Not because I wanted to punish them with silence, because I had finally learned that urgency belonged to the person creating it. Mom's panic did not automatically become my deadline. My response took 6 sentences. I did not tell anyone I was dead. I did not create a death certificate, authorize a memorial, or ask anyone to announce my death. I exercised my right to medical privacy after being injured. I am recovering. From now on, communication needs to be in writing, unless we agree otherwise in advance. I will not discuss business documents without receiving them before any meeting. Dad replied almost immediately. You're hiding behind paperwork. For once, the accusation did not sting. Paperwork was not where I hid. It was where other people stopped being allowed to change yesterday. Mom sent 3 more messages that morning. The first was anger. The second was grief. The third asked whether I understood what Paige had done to the company. That one I did not answer. By afternoon, Dad had requested a meeting. I agreed on my terms. A coffee shop near my office. Daytime. Public. No documents handed to me at the table. Any business issue had to be emailed at least one day beforehand. If voices were raised, or the conversation turned into pressure about signing anything, I would leave. Dad responded, "Fine." Mom responded, "I cannot believe my own daughter needs rules to speak to us." I stared at that sentence longer than I wanted to, then put my phone face down. The meeting was 3 days later. I arrived early because being late had never been one of my rebellions. A small table near the front window gave me a clear view of the entrance. My shoulders still ached if I sat too long without changing position, and stairs made my body hesitate for half a second before my mind caught up. Recovery was not cinematic. It was inconvenient. It was discovering that washing my hair could exhaust me, and that sometimes the body remembered before the brain wanted to. Mom and Dad entered together. My mother stopped when she saw me. Her hand went to her mouth. Dad stood behind her. For 1 second, neither spoke. That moment should have satisfied the part of me that had once imagined walking into the remembrance dinner. It didn't. Maybe because there was no room full of witnesses. Maybe because I no longer needed one. Mom crossed the distance first. "Nora." She reached for me. I stepped back. Her hands dropped. "You won't even let me hug you?" "I'm not ready for that." Her face changed. Not into something monstrous. Just hurt. That mattered too. A boundary could hurt someone and still be necessary. We sat. Dad ordered coffee. Mom did not. For almost a minute, no one spoke. Then she said, "Do you know what you put us through?" There it was. Not, "Are you in pain?" Not, "How is your shoulder?" Not, "Are you afraid of stairs now?" What did you put us through? Something in me settled. "I was injured in your house," I said. "I woke up hearing you and Dad agree on what you would tell people. We were panicking. That may be true. You were lying there and we thought. You thought I was dead." Her mouth tightened. "Yes. And then you organized a succession dinner without a death certificate." Dad leaned forward. "That dinner was about keeping the company stable." "Exactly." His jaw moved. "Nora, we are not going to pretend the company isn't part of this." "I'm not pretending." "Good. Because what you've done has consequences for dozens of people." The old pressure arrived, dressed in responsible language. Employees. Legacy. Obligations. The company. Never my signature. Never my consent. "What I've done," I said, "is stop paying company expenses personally, stop providing unpaid project controls work, and refuse to sell my membership interest under terms I didn't approve. You pulled support at the worst possible time. I pulled my support. Same difference." "No." Dad sat back. "See, this is what I mean. Everything is a technical distinction with you. Ownership is a technical distinction." His eyes narrowed. Mom interrupted. "We're not here to fight." I looked at her. "Then why are we here?" Her expression softened. "For you." I waited. "We thought you were gone." "I know. You have no idea what that was like." "Probably not." I couldn't sleep. That might have been true. She might have meant every word. Then she added, "And while we were trying to grieve, everything started falling apart." There it was again. My absence measured by operational inconvenience. I looked down at my coffee. A few months earlier, that would have devastated me. Now it clarified something. I had wanted an apology, because I thought the right combination of words would turn my parents into people who finally saw the arrangement the way I did. Maybe they never would. That did not make my version less real. Dad placed both palms on the table. "We can still fix the restructuring." "No. You haven't even heard the new terms." "I don't need new terms today. You own 20% of a company you're refusing to help. I own 20% of a company. Those are not the same sentence." Mom closed her eyes briefly. "Nora, please don't do this." "Do what?" "Punish everyone because you're angry with us. The company can pay for the work it uses." Dad gave a humorless laugh. "You know what that will cost." "Yes." That answer stopped him. I had run the numbers. He knew I had. For the first time, the cost was not an abstract threat they could use to frighten me back into position. It was simply a business expense. Mom reached across the table but stopped before touching my hand. "Why are you doing this?" The question surprised me. Not because she had never asked. Because this was probably as close as I was going to get to the question underneath all of them. I took a breath. Did either of you ever ask whether I wanted to keep carrying it? Mom looked confused. Dad frowned. The company, the bills, the schedules, the shortfalls, Paige's mistakes, the weekend calls, being the one who could always handle it. We appreciated you, Mom said. That wasn't my question. Dad looked toward the window. Mom's voice sharpened. You were always better at those things. That still wasn't my question. No answer came. The tiny thing I had wanted for years sat on the table between us. One honest acknowledgement. Not even an apology. Just recognition that my competence had never been consent. Neither of them could give it to me. The strange part was that I survived that too. I finished my coffee, then stood. Mom looked up. That's it? For today. We haven't resolved anything. I have. Outside, the air smelled like rain. My shoulder hurt. My parents remained inside. I walked to my car without looking through the window to see whether they were watching. The company did not collapse. That became important over the next few months. Whitmore Renovation canceled the warehouse expansion first. I knew because, as a member, I received the revised business notice. The second crew expansion was postponed. A project controls consultant was hired on contract. The scheduling software moved onto a company card. Insurance costs appeared where they should have been all along. Several margins tightened. No apocalypse followed. The numbers did something far less dramatic. They became honest. Every task I had once absorbed now had a price. Every risk my father had called just helping appeared somewhere in an operating budget. Every hour I stopped donating had to be assigned to somebody whose job description actually included it. Priya looked at one quarterly summary with me during lunch. You were cheap. Thank you. That was not a compliment. I know. The profit line was lower than before. Still positive. The company was smaller. Still operating. I stared at the report and felt something unclench inside me. For years, I had believed my refusal would destroy people. That belief had kept me available long after generosity turned into obligation. The truth was less flattering to everyone involved. They did not need me to survive. They needed me to make survival cheaper. A former Whitmore employee contacted me once about a job opening at my company. I gave her the public posting and offered to be a reference for the work I had directly seen her do. That was it. No campaign to drain my parents' staff. No revenge recruitment. Helping one person did not require rebuilding the whole system behind her. My own work returned gradually. Half days became full days. Physical therapy went from 3 sessions a week to 2, then 1. The first morning, I climbed the stairs to my bedroom without gripping the railing hard enough to whiten my knuckles. I almost missed the significance. That was probably a good sign. Recovery was becoming ordinary. So was saying no. 6 months after the fall, I made the last major business decision, connecting me to Whitmore Renovation. I sold my 20% membership interest. Not under version 6. Not at the number Dad had placed in front of me. An independent valuation gave us a range. The final price landed inside it. Nothing magical. Enough to matter. Not enough to transform me into a different class of person overnight. The payment terms were documented, scheduled, and boring. Exactly what I wanted. Before signing, I read every page. Dad had once accused me of turning everything into numbers. This time, the numbers were what allowed me to leave without owing anyone gratitude for letting me. Part of the proceeds paid the medical expenses insurance did not cover. Part went into emergency savings. The rest went into an account I named Home and Future. For several minutes, I considered whether the name was embarrassingly sentimental, then decided nobody else had access to the account, so nobody else got a vote. Paige left Whitmore Renovation before I completed the sale. She told me herself over dinner one evening. We had begun meeting occasionally. Public places at first. Then walks. Nothing weekly. Nothing assumed. She had taken a project coordinator position with another contractor. The title was smaller than the one Mom had planned to give her. So was the office. So basically I'm starting over, Paige said. No. She looked at me. You're starting at the level where someone other than Mom evaluates you. That sounds worse. It might be. She stirred her soup. After a moment she said, My supervisor corrected me in front of 2 people yesterday. What did you do? Went to the bathroom and complained about her in my head. That seems legal. Paige smiled faintly. Then I checked the schedule. And she was right. I waited. That part was less fun. It usually is. Her spoon rested against the bowl. I thought being the favorite meant they believed in me. The sentence landed more gently than it would have months earlier. Sometimes, I said. It meant they kept you away from the numbers. She looked down. I let them. Yes. Her eyes came back to mine. There was a time when I would have softened the answer immediately. Added context. Told her she was young. Reminded her mom had trained us both. All of that could be true. None of it needed to erase the first answer. Yes, I repeated. She nodded. A month later, Paige began repaying one of the expenses I had covered for her years earlier. Small monthly transfers. No dramatic check. No speech. The first time one appeared in my account, I almost sent it back. Then stopped. Refusing repayment would have been another way of preserving the old roles. So I left it there. That did not make us repaired. It made one line item honest. Mom never reached the same point. Her messages became less frequent, but their substance barely changed. One arrived on a Tuesday evening while I was waiting for a physical therapy appointment. How long are you going to punish us? I read it. The answer in my head came instantly. This is not punishment. Then another thought followed. She already knew I saw it that way. Explaining again would not create understanding. It would only reopen negotiation. So I moved her thread out of my favorites. Did not block her. Did not reply. Then went into my appointment. Afterward, Priya and I met for Thai food. We talked about a contractor who kept submitting the same change order backup under different file names. A terrible television show she had become obsessed with. Whether the restaurant's spice scale was deliberately trying to kill us. My mother did not come up once. Halfway home, I realized I had spent an entire evening without discussing Whitmore renovation. That felt bigger than selling my interest. A week later, a package arrived from Paige. The walnut watch box sat on top. Below it were the missing pieces of silverware. At the bottom was the old binder. No note explaining why she had taken them. I called her. You sent the box. Yeah. Why was the binder at your place? Mom brought it over after the accident. She said we might need old project records. There it was. A source. Not a guess. Did you take the watch too? No. She did. She put a bunch of your things in boxes. I took some home when she told me we needed to sort them later. Why? Paige was quiet for a moment. I don't have a good answer. That's okay. No, it isn't. I let her keep the discomfort. She added, I should have asked why we were touching anything. Yes. Another pause. I'm sorry. Thank you. That was all. An apology could be accepted without becoming a contract for closeness. After the call, I opened the binder. Old handwritten notes filled the pages. Schedule arrows. Cost assumptions. Reminders to call vendors. A version of me existed in every margin. 19, 20, 21. Always solving. Always available. For an hour, I scanned anything worth preserving. The physical binder went into an archive box. Version 6 joined it. So did my copy of the police report. The box went onto a shelf in the spare room closet. Not under my bed. Not beside my desk. Evidence did not need to be visible every day to remain true. My grandmother's watch stayed out a little longer. I wore it to work the following morning, then placed it in my dresser. Not everything needed to become a symbol. Sometimes a watch could just tell time. By the following spring, mornings had become mine in ways I had never noticed they weren't before. Coffee. Shower. A glance at work email. Sometimes music. No automatic check of my parents' accounts. No Sunday review. No mental inventory of who might need what before dinner. The stiffness in my leg had mostly faded. My shoulders still complained in damp weather, but stairs were stairs again. One Saturday morning, the doorbell rang. I was upstairs folding laundry. The camera notification appeared on my phone. Paige stood on the porch, holding 2 coffees. No suitcase. No papers. No emergency expression. She had not texted. I watched her shift one cup from one hand to the other. For a few seconds, old instinct took over. She's already here. Don't make it awkward. Just open the door. Instead, I typed, "Did you call first?" Through the camera, I saw her take out her phone. Her shoulders dropped slightly. A reply appeared. "No. Sorry." She looked at the door, then stepped away from it. Another message came. "I should have asked. I'll go." Paige turned toward the sidewalk. I stayed where I was. Not angry. Not testing her. Just allowing the boundary to finish becoming real. 2 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. "Can I come over?" The question was so ordinary that I almost laughed. "Can I?" Not "I'm outside." Not "Open up." Not "Mom needs us to talk." Not "But we're sisters." A request. For most of my life, the people closest to me had treated access as proof of love. Keys, passwords, money, time, availability. If I resisted, it meant I cared less. Standing at the top of my own staircase, phone in hand, I finally understood how backwards that had been. Love did not become weaker when someone asked permission. Sometimes asking was the thing that made it safe. I walked downstairs. One step, then another. No flash of the fall. No hand reaching for a folder. At the bottom, sunlight came through the narrow glass beside the front door. The old emergency key was inside my house now, tucked into the back of a drawer. No one outside had a copy. Paige waited on the sidewalk. I unlocked the door. She turned when she heard it. "You can come in," I said. Her face changed with relief, but she did not move until I stepped aside. That mattered. Not because she was my sister. Not because she had apologized. Not because the past had been erased. Because this time, she had asked. For most of my life, family meant people who believed they already had the key. I learned it could also mean people who knocked and waited for me to decide.